All right. Thank you for joining us. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Spectra and Comprise webinar on modernizing archiving with true scale-out. This morning, we're going to be joined by Krishna Subramanian, COO of Comprise, and Jeff Bronstein, Director of Product Management at SpectraLogic. Just a couple housekeeping items prior to us kicking off the webinar. If you have any questions during the webinar, please go ahead and use the window that's docked on your screen. There is a question drop-down section. Enter those and we will respond to those toward the end of the webinar. If you run into any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can also use that and I will respond to make sure that we clear those up. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand this off to Krishna with Comprise. So take it away.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on the call. I'm going to start off the webinar and then Jeff and I will make this pretty interactive. And as Katie mentioned, please feel free to enter any questions you have and we'd be happy to answer them. In this webinar today, we're going to cover three things. The first is, what is happening with data today and how can you manage the explosive data growth that's coming our way within flat budgets? The second, how can you cut costs of managing data without any impact to users or applications? Because we all know that if you ask users for permission before you do something, nothing really gets done. The third is, and this is new information, how can you actually scale on demand with a tape system for archiving? How can you get live archiving with a data management solution and with an affordable a target such as tape and still make it a linear scale out? And this is where the new offerings from SpectraLogic with the Spectra Tape Spectra Stack product is really compelling, and Jeff is going to talk to you more about what Spectra Stack is. So these are the three things we're going to cover in the webinar today. So let's get started. As we all know, data is growing really, really rapidly. A big challenge we have with data is that not only do we have to manage historical data, which already was growing fast, but we are in a mode of hyper growth today. And the reason our data is exploding now is because there's far more machine-generated data today than ever before. If we think about every vertical that we're in, whether it's genomics with genome sequencers and new sequencers getting better than the previous ones, or media and entertainment with higher fidelity rendering devices, or with cars and the EDA market with self-driving autonomous cars, in pretty much every industry you can think of, machine-generated data is far surpassing human-generated data. And that data is going to grow explosively. So how can you manage all this data and how can you get relevant information out of your data easily without breaking the bank? A key element of data is that even though data footprint is growing so fast, a lot of that data becomes inactive very quickly. Think of it this way. Imagine growth is going really fast, but it's also aging rapidly. Data is getting inactive faster than ever before. So even though you have explosive growth in data footprint, most of that data is cold or inactive. And this is where this idea of live archiving makes a lot of sense. How can you take that cold, inactive data? How can you identify it proactively? How can you manage it at a much lower cost than your hot data? How can you make that whole experience seamless to users so users don't even know that some data is being managed on a lower cost tier, some data is being backed up in a different way, some data is being replicated with less cost? How can you make all that really invisible to users and applications? That's what we're really going to talk about today. So if you look at it, by managing cold data differently than hot data, the savings can be significant. This is an actual example of a 2 petabyte customer showing you their costs before any data management was in place and after data management is in place. And what happens is, if you take the cold data, which in most environments, 60 to 80% of the data has not been used in over a year. If you take that data and you move it to a cost-efficient target like Spectra, then by lowering the cost of storing, replicating, and backing up that cold data, you can save significantly on the total footprint. In fact, with the savings, you can move hot data to a much better platform like the latest Flash platform. So you can give great performance of hot data by simply removing cold data to something cheaper, and you can save overall on your footprint. Why has this not been done before? It sounds pretty obvious. We all know intuitively that a lot of our data is cold and inactive. And people have tried different curing solutions in the past or data lifecycle management solutions, and it really hasn't worked that well. And why is that? Well, because historically, the space has had three major problems. The first problem is a lack of visibility. Many solutions that should give you visibility to data act in silos. They either work just on one storage platform, or quite often they're pretty expensive to license anyway, or they slow down the performance of your storage. So getting visibility to data across storage in an easy and intuitive way has not been that easy. So lack of visibility has been the first problem. The second problem has been disruption. When you move data from a Tier 1 storage platform to a archive platform, even the word archive kind of feels like something that is inaccessible. And if you remove access for users and applications, if you take data out of their namespace, now you have behavior change, and there's resistance to that. So changing user behavior has been an impediment to good data management. And the third thing is that a lot of the solutions that were built to manage data are a decade or more old, and they were built when a terabyte looked like a rather large number. And today, petabytes are commonplace, and we're talking exabytes and zettabytes. So the scale at which those solutions operate does not match today's reality. So what you really need is something that is simple to deploy, simple to scale, simple to grow on demand without over-provisioning, and affordable. And that's really what Spectra and Komprise provide you. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So the way the solutions work is really quite simple. You can get started with just a virtual machine. You really don't need any infrastructure to get the ball rolling. So Komprise is the software that provides you visibility into your data. It shows how data is growing across your current infrastructure. And by policy, it moves and copies data into SpectraLogic targets. So the Komprise architecture itself is just software, and it scales out on demand, and we'll talk more about it. But what's beautiful is that Komprise points to SpectraLogic, and Spectra, Jeff will talk more about this, but Spectra has multiple options for you. Spectra has some disk targets like Spectra Verde, and then it also has tape targets, which are designed for massive scale at very affordable price points. And with the new Spectra stack, which Jeff will again cover in more detail, they've made that tape library itself highly modular. So what this means is that you can get started with a tape solution in a very affordable way, and you can scale that solution on demand as your needs grow. And of course, the scaling on the back is matched with linear scaling on the software. So you essentially have a scale on demand solution that you can keep completely on premise, and it competes with cloud price points and makes the entire process affordable and simple. You might say, well, that all sounds good, but how do I know this really works? So at this point, I'm going to switch and show you an actual demo. All right. So hopefully you can see my demo screen here. What I'm showing here is the Comprise console. So when you set up Comprise, you literally have to just bring up a virtual machine, which we call the Comprise Observer, in your environment. And once you bring up the Comprise Observer, you're taken to a web page, much like this one. And when you go here, you can literally start looking at all your storage. So even before you move any data, you can first understand what data you have. And to do that, you simply point Comprise at any storage that you are interested in analyzing. This could be anything that supports an SMB, CIFS, or NFS interface. Even NFS v4 is supported. So you can point at, in this example, in this demo, we have some EMC Isilon, we have some NetApp 8 mode clusters, they could be NetApp 9 mode as well. You can have some NetApp 7 clusters, we have some Windows servers, etc. So literally just give the IP address of the storage, give Comprise access credentials to it, point at it, and then Comprise finds all the exports and the shares mounted on that storage. You pick the ones you want to look at, and once you do that, you are ready to actually get visibility into your data. So the minute you've pointed Comprise at all your shares, Comprise starts analyzing that data. And within 15 minutes of getting this set up, even on petabytes of data, you will see analytics into your data footprint. The first thing you will see is how much data you have across all the storage and a profile of that data by age. As I mentioned before, Comprise today manages hundreds of petabytes of data across our customers, and I can tell you that regardless of vertical, the minimum amount of age data we have seen in most environments is 60% of data being over a year old. In some cases, it's as high as 80%. So you can actually look at the profile of your data by age. You can see how much data hasn't been used and how long. You can see that in this example, about 50% of our data hasn't been touched in a year plus. And then some data has been touched more recently. Not only do you get a profile of your data by age, it also shows you how fast your data is actually growing. Again, based on industry, some industries like genomics and EDA are in hyper-growth mode. Some industries like financial services have a lot of legacy data. So based on your industry, based on your own data growth, Comprise actually projects for you how much more storage you would need in 3 years if you did nothing versus if you implemented your policy. And this is dynamically updates. So you can see your data growth. You also get different statistics on what's actually happening with your data, what kinds of data you have, a profile of each by age, is it big files or small files? And the reason these things are important is not only so that you get visibility into the data, but Comprise itself is an adaptive solution. So Comprise uses this information on the profile of your data to optimize how it works in your environment. And who's using the data, which users, which groups, where the data actually sits, etc. So you get a pretty good understanding of your data footprint, but along with this understanding, if you notice, there are some cost savings being shown here. These cost and capacity savings are coming from your plan. So as you are analyzing the data, even before you move any data, not only can you understand what your data looks like today, you can also project what will happen if you started implementing some data management policy. And you can tailor these policies to your own needs. And the way you do that is by going to this plan editor on the left. You can define different policy groups for your different types of data. You can specify what shares belong to each group, and you can specify certain conditions under which cold data should be archived transparently moved and archived and to where. And also, if you want to reduce the cost of a mirror of your NAS, you can also put a copy of data into a target. So in this example, we picked a Spectra Stack target, and Jeff will talk about how easy that is to set up. But once you pick a target, you can literally specify the conditions under which data moves there. And notice that as I change these conditions, these projections will automatically update. So for example, if we want to be a little more aggressive, maybe anything that hasn't been touched in over 6 months, we want to move to Spectra Stack, I just do that, and I don't know if you saw, but this number changed. So now it's saying 65% of my data will get moved out based on these policies. It's going to free 186 terabytes based on my growth rate of primary footprint, and the mirror and the backup copies will be reduced by about triple that amount, and here's the cost savings. And all the numbers in here, you can actually modify for your own environment. So you can edit the cost model to fit your particular needs. So essentially what I've shown so far is how you can get a very quick understanding of your data and that analysis of what's happening to your data, and how you can analyze and set policies for when data gets moved and archived. Once you're happy with all of this, you can actually activate the plan, and that's when Komprise starts moving the data based on your policies. So when Komprise moves that data, what it actually does is it moves the data without any changes in your environment. So essentially what it's doing, and I'm switching back to the slide now, is if you have a folder, and here I'm showing an SMB folder, but NFS works the same way, just it doesn't have a Windows Explorer view to it. If you have files in a folder, and some of those files, based on your policy, got moved out, this is that folder before the move. This is that same folder after the move. And these rectangles we put to show you which files have moved. If you look at this before and the after, the files look the same. And if you open the file, if your user goes to open the file will be returned to them. And that whole experience is the same. It's transparent because essentially Komprise is preserving all the access controls and all the file credentials and all the file metadata on the objects that it's moving. So even though this data is being stored in Spectra through Black Pearl as objects, you're still seeing the full file information of that data in your namespace. So there's no disruption to the namespace for the users. Now, depending on whether the file is cached in Spectra or it's on the tape itself, it will show an offline flag if it is on tape and if there's a latency for retrieval. But other than that, the whole experience is seamless because you're essentially getting a transparent namespace to that data, to the moved data. And Komprise does this. Komprise moves the data transparently without using any stubs and without using any agents on the storage. So it's using standard file protocols. It's using the protocols of NFS and SMB CIFS and S3 to move the data, and it preserves a redundant file system view of that data, and it does that without getting in front of your hot data or metadata paths. So this is not fronting your data, it's sitting behind your file system. And it's not using any stubs, and it's not using any agents on your storage. So some of the benefits of this architecture are that, again, you don't need any storage agents. There's no modification to your environment to put Komprise in. Komprise acts as an SMB or NFS client to your storage. There is really no changes for users and applications. All the moved data still belongs to the same namespace and is still accessible from the same namespace as before. There are no static stubs. There's no changes to the hot data or metadata path. Komprise is not fronting your data. There's no training needed. and there are no upfront costs. It just runs as virtual machines, and there's no lock-in. Everything is going through standard file format. So with that background, I want to hand this over to Jeff now to give you an overview of the Spectra solution and to talk about some of the joint customers where we've been successful together.
Thanks, Krishna. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, SpectraLogic is dedicated to long-term or secondary storage. We're the only major vendor that is focused solely on this space. And so we're a perfect complement to the Comprise solution, together helping customers move their inactive data to more affordable storage so that they can extend and expand their storage environment. Now, we're very excited to provide this latest product to our customers called Spectra Stack, which we announced 2 weeks ago. It's a new tape library, and again, it fits even better, I would say, with Comprise and our model of working together to solve customers' problems, storage problems. You know, in addition to all the things you've come to expect from Spectra, having a tape that's very affordable, very reliable, and all the nice features that we provide in the software of the product, we also now have a very scalable solution that scales, as Krishna said, perfectly with their solution. So we can start with one Spectra Stack module. It's a 6U module, and we can start in the tens of terabytes range for storage. And this solution can scale up into a total of 7 units in one rack, one standard size rack, getting you over 6.5 petabytes of storage. So you can truly scale, not just on the library itself, but even within the library, we can scale and provide, you know, the additional tapes and licenses for storage so that you can grow as your storage grows, but no more. So again, a perfect solution. Now this is really complemented with our Black Pearl product. So Black Pearl is the way that Comprise and many of our partners and software products are able to move data into our secondary storage solutions. And we'll talk more details about Black Pearl in a minute, but it essentially acts as a gateway. And within that one interface it provides, Comprise can move data in and out into not only our Spectra tape solution, our Spectra Stack, but also all of our other tape libraries. You know, we have our Spectra T950 and Tfinity that scale into the exabytes of storage, as well as some really nice disk solutions, online disk solutions that are still archived, very affordable but highly reliable. And we also can move data, and we do often move data for customers to the public cloud and to another Black Pearl. So this is a great way to get data to another site. Again, when you're moving data to a secondary storage solution like SpectraLogic provides, you're getting the data out of the backup cycle of the primary storage. That's part of the big cost savings that the Comprise Spectra solution offers, is reducing your backup costs or snapshot costs, that type of thing on your primary storage. So since you're moving that inactive data to this archive, you want to make sure that your data is safe, because you're not going to be doing the typical types of backups. So you typically want to have multiple copies of your data, ideally on multiple formats. We call that genetic diversity, right? So having a tape offline, for example, is essentially immune to any kind of a ransomware or a, virus type attack. So that's very safe. And then also the geographic separation of data, having your data in multiple locations, so if something bad happens in one location, you've got that data safe in another location. And that can be done by ejecting tapes from something like the Spectra Stack, or by using replication to another Black Pearl, where you might have another type of storage at the other site, like disk or tape, or you might make copies to, say, Amazon or Microsoft Azure for that extra protection. Go ahead, Krishna, to the next slide. So this is Black Pearl. We call it a converged storage system. And really, it's in the past, there's been multiple solutions that you've needed in order to accomplish the same thing that you can now accomplish with Black Pearl. It provides two interfaces, both an object storage S3 type interface, and that's the type that Comprise uses to move data into the tape library. So we essentially, with Black Pearl, are providing an object storage interface to tape and other secondary storage targets. However, we can also provide a NAS front end on Black Pearl, meaning a CIFS or NFS SMB type interface, and we can scale that up to the petabytes. We can provide very affordable NAS storage in the range of 7.5 cents US per gigabyte, so very affordable. And then we can also copy or move that data from the NAS storage over to the object store, where you could use it like a watch folder or use it like a backup to move data to tape or a cloud or something else. We really support multiple concurrent workflows. So most of our customers that are using Comprise are also using Black Pearl for something else for storage. Like maybe they have projects that come up and they want to just archive them manually when they're done. They can use Black Pearl for that as well. We have numerous clients that we provide for free, and our partners have many clients that we certify to ensure they work well. But basically, in the past, we've had to have expensive data movers often to move this data, and with Black Pearl, you no longer have to pay a penalty for both there's no software license charge based on capacity in Black Pearl. Now, we've had a lot of success with Comprise in the Spectra joint solution. We have numerous joint installations. These are just two examples, and they're quite different, and so we wanted to use them as kind of a comparison. The first is Pacific Biosciences. They're based in the San Francisco Bay Area. They actually make genomic sequencers, and they use a lot of the sequencers themselves, of course, for testing and for research. And so they create a massive amount of data with these tools, and it grows very fast. Then they have different levels of analysis of the data, and they need to be able to archive that quickly because it fills their primary storage quickly. But it's difficult for them to have users doing that constantly. They'd rather have a system monitor and identify the inactive data and move it automatically. So they use a Spectra tape library and Black Pearl with Comprise to move that data. And when they need to retrieve it, they either go and they click on the files in the off the primary storage, or they go to the web interface of Comprise and ask for entire directories or projects to be retrieved as they need to work on them. So very simple to use, automated, very hands-off, and it's just saving them a ton of money on primary storage. No need to expand it, and reducing their backup costs quite a bit. The second one is quite a different use case, but the same basic need, I suppose, at its core. This is LJA Engineering. They're a civil engineering firm, and they use a NAS primary storage that was filling up because they generate 20% year-over-year data growth. And but they wanted to use a system that was also, they wanted an archive target that was also a NAS because they wanted to use it for other purposes besides Comprise, and they also wanted that instant retrieval. So when they click on the archive file on their primary storage, it opens up and retrieves every time, just like it was on the primary storage. A little bit slower, of course, since it's on a secondary system. That's not a parallel file system. But they used our Verde NAS storage, and that's worked very well for them. Again, that was a very low barrier for entry to get to the archive solution. They quickly and easily extended their primary NAS storage using that solution. So we're seeing lots of success together in the marketplace. So here's the Pacific Biosciences solution. They have a high-performance compute node, and then they move data to a NetApp system. They connected the Comprise grid to that, which, as Krishna said, consists of a number of Comprise observers. They manage that via the Comprise director. So Krishna showed you the web interface for that, where they can set their thresholds of the age of data that they want to archive. And then Comprise connects via an S3 type interface to the Black Pearl object store. And then they use a Spectra T380, which is roughly a 380 tape slot tape library. And they use our tape encryption to encrypt the data. Then they can eject the copies of the data and take them off-site. They know that they'll be safe because they're off-site and the tapes are encrypted, so if anything ever happened to them during transport, then they know that the data will not be stolen. So that's a very nice solution for them, saving a lot of money. The next solution is the LJA one. They use a NAS where they're generating a lot of their design type data for their engineering firm. Again, they've got the Comprise observer grid connected to that, monitoring the data with their Comprise director, and they're moving data to the Verde NAS storage. And I believe they're using the CIFS interface of the Verde to move that data over. And as users request data, they click on the files and they transparently go through the Comprise Observer grid and are pulled back from the Verde, and the user is none the wiser. Now the users, of course, can also get the data back if they were to connect directly to the Verde, because Comprise makes no change to the source data when they archive it. It looks exactly the same, so it can be accessed directly via the Verde if needed. Those are just two examples of the success we've seen. And again, you can kind of think of it as extending the primary storage system with an affordable model that can essentially extend forever and grow, start small, but grow as needed. And I think that's all we've got for our presentation. Why don't we go ahead and move to questions. Katie or Eric, are you there?
I am indeed. So we do have a couple questions that came through during the webinar. The first is, what file types does Comprise not have visibility to?
So Comprise works with, yeah, sure. We work with any storage that has NFS or SMB CIFS or as sources, and NFS, SMB CIFS, or S3 as targets. So if you have native blocks, if you have block storage and you are not providing an NFS or SMB mount to it, if it's just iSCSI with no SMB NFS access, then Comprise does not support that. But anything outside of that, quite often, even if you're storing data in block, if you're serving it to users, you usually have a CIFS mount to it or an NFS mount. So that's what we go through. So we support all data types that can be stored on NFS or SMB CIFS.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, and the next question is, what is the difference between archiving data to Spectra's Verde versus archiving data to tape?
Sure, this is Jeff. I'll take that one. So we kind of discussed that a little bit, but basically the two main differences are, first of all, what does the customer want in terms of storage? Because they're obviously going to use Comprise as the main component of the Spectra archive storage, be it Verde disk, the NAS type solution, or have it be Black Pearl, perhaps with tape. And so there may be other needs that the customer has, or they may want to interact with it outside of Comprise as well. So that's one thing to consider, is what do they want to use for other workflows, for other tasks that they want to do to move in active data to Spectra storage. The other is the restore time consideration. So tape is the most affordable and most reliable storage medium available, but of course there's a little bit of delay on retrieval time. So with tape, the robot has to grab the tape, it has to put it into the tape drive so that it can be read, then the tape drive has to spool the tape to the location of the files on the tape, and then it reads those and brings those back to the Black Pearl's disk cache. So there can be a little bit of time on retrieval, and so that instant access isn't there always like it is with a NAS solution. With a NAS solution, you click on the what we call the symlink, what we leave in the place of the original source file. You click on the symlink, and the Verde NAS will always retrieve the file and bring it back to the customer, and that can be done via a user or via an application. If it's just on tape, now there's a good chance that a file that you've maybe that is on tape, it could be in the Comprise cache, it could be in the Spectra Black Pearl cache, or it could be archived on Spectra disk behind Black Pearl. We call that Arctic Blue. In any of those cases, again, the file will come back quickly, and the system will be, the user or application will be none the wiser. If tape is used and it's the only place that the file resides, then there can be a delay on retrieval. And so you have two choices. One is to click the file to essentially activate it to open it so that the file starts coming back. You could do that in, say, Windows Explorer or Mac Finder. The other choice is to go into the web interface of the Comprise director and do a retrieval of a directory. Now we find that typically, again, like with folks like Pacific Biosciences, which tend to archive things on projects, that restoring via the web interface via a project, i.e. a directory, works very well for them. So they don't mind the extra penalty of retrieval time because of the great cost savings and high reliability and availability to take off-site the data like tape provides.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff. All right, another question here. Does Comprise use stub files with some bytes of the file in the stub?
Right. So Comprise, does not use a traditional stub file, and let me explain the difference. Traditionally, the products that move data would replace the data with what is called a stub file, and the stub would essentially be the source of information of where the data is moved to. The problem with that approach is twofold. The first problem is a stub is proprietary. Nothing other than that one application knows how to read the stub. And the second problem is the stub is the only source of truth, and so if the stub is deleted or orphaned, there's no way to get to the data. So Comprise avoids these issues by not using traditional stub files. Comprise uses something that we call a dynamic link, and here's how that works. So when Comprise moves a file, let's say to Spectra Stack, Comprise is actually writing the file as an object into Spectra, but it's keeping all the file metadata information, and it's putting that information into a link. The link is what is left on the source filer, and the link is dynamic, meaning that it doesn't actually point to the object itself, it points to a virtual IP address. And the reason for these two differences is that, first, because it's a standard link that all the file systems support, you don't require any agents on the filer, and Comprise can sit behind your data path. So your filer continues to be the one servicing all the requests. So we don't have to get in front of your hot data. The second benefit is if the link is ever deleted accidentally, then all the data can be restored because the link was not the only source of truth. So those are the two benefits it provides. I think the actual question was, is there enough metadata in the link so that you don't have to go retrieve the object to look at its metadata? And the answer is yes. There's enough metadata there. All the access control, all the metadata of the file are kept with the link. So just to look at metadata, you don't have to retrieve the object. And I actually wanted to show you, Jeff mentioned that in Comprise, you can bulk recall data ahead of time if you want. So I did want to show one thing. Comprise, unlike traditional HSM and data management solutions, in Comprise, you can actually specify what your recall policies are. So you could say, for example, maybe you want to leave everything on Spectra tape unless the data is modified. Only when it's modified, you want to bring it back. Or you could say, hey, bring it back only when it's modified, and if it's read this often, then write it back. It's getting hot. And you can specify those conditions. So Comprise can leave data in the target itself and just cache it on access, or it can write it back to the source depending on your policies.
Perfect. Okay, so two more questions here. Does Black Pearl have a software license charge on capacity?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Thanks, Katie. So yeah, the short answer is no, fortunately. So, and that is a big advantage of Black Pearl over other what we call middleware solutions that move data from primary storage to more affordable storage. Black Pearl is providing that easier interface that Comprise can use, and other solutions like our Eon browser that allows you to drag and drop files into Black Pearl and tape. That's the advantage of Black Pearl, is that you're not going to pay that penalty. You're already paying Spectra for storage, right? You're going to buy a tape library. You're going to license those tape slots. You're going to buy those disk systems. We don't see a need to charge you again to get it there. So there's no license fee in the Black Pearl. We're trying to enable our customers to more affordably use secondary storage. So no.
Perfect. It looks like we just got a couple more. So do you have any cost comparison for using Spectra on-prem versus archiving out to AWS Glacier?
Yeah, we absolutely do. And I will take that as a note, and we'll include that in the follow-up email.
Okay, I've got that, Jeff. And let's see. So can Comprise see inactive virtual machine files on NFS storage? I had someone mention that as an area of risk that they didn't have good visibility to. So can Comprise see inactive virtual machine files on NFS storage?
Yes. Can we see inactive VM files on NFS storage? Is that the question?
Correct.
Well, so if you have virtual machine files stored as VMDKs, that's just another file on your storage. And yes, Comprise can show you how many of those VMDKs are active and how many are inactive.
Perfect.
And
okay.
one thing, if I can follow up to that, Katie, is a good point is we have in particular one customer that uses, and in fact Comprise has probably many more there, where they use Comprise and Spectra not just as a method of offloading inactive data from their primary storage, but also as a means to protect it on their primary storage. So they want to have some data on some system that they want to keep the data on, but maybe they don't, maybe it's inactive, or maybe for whatever reason they don't want backups running on it. And so they can instead use Comprise to make copies of the data and move it to Spectra tape, and as the files change, they can get those new files and move them over as well. So it can be used as a data protection scheme as well.
Perfect. Okay, and this is a multi-part question. So assuming you have HDD and tape tiered storage within Comprise, is there a way to direct traffic, such as data not touched for 1 year to HDD and data not touched for 3 years off to tape?
Yes, so Comprise, well, sorry Jeff, do you want me to answer that?
Yes, please.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so Comprise does provide ongoing lifecycle management on the data. So you can specify different targets. So you could say move data to disk or if it's over a year old, but if it's over 3 years old, move it to tape. Tiering from Spectra Verde to a Spectra Black Pearl is on the roadmap. It's not there yet. We do provide tiering in the cloud if you want to move from S3 to Glacier, for example, that's there. But for disk to tape, that's coming very soon. Jeff, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to add, fortunately, we do provide that within the Black Pearl ecosystem. So when Comprise moves data to Black Pearl, it's going to move it to a container we call a bucket. It's a similar terminology to the cloud, as some of you may know. On that bucket, you can set up data policy within Black Pearl. So for example, you might make a data policy that says 2 copies to tape with 1 copy ejected. So anything written, any data written to that bucket will have 2 copies made to tape, and one of the tapes will be ejected when it's full for ability to take it off-site. Now, in another example of a data policy would be that you want to make a copy to disk and to tape. So 1 copy to disk, 1 copy to tape. But you only want it to reside on disk for some period of time and have it expire after that period of time. So that could be 6 months, a year, whatever. So that way, in that first period when the data is warmer, it's inactive, but maybe a little warmer, it'll come back very quickly because it's on disk. But when it's colder, maybe a year later, it will expire off that disk eventually, but it'll still always be available on the tape, or Glacier. You could have Amazon Glacier be your long-term target as well behind the Black Pearl.
Fantastic. Okay, and for our final question, is the Comprise Spectra solution cross-platform, as in Mac and Windows compatible?
Yes, absolutely. You can access the data from a Mac client, Windows client, Linux client. It can be any client. And that's the beauty of not requiring agents. So the data is fully accessible exactly as before.
Fantastic. All right, so that concludes all of our questions. We will be sending out a recording to the webinar for any of those that missed it or for anyone that joined late. So expect to see an email with that within the next few days. Any closing remarks, Jeff or Krishna?
No, we'd love to hear from you. You've got an email there, spectra@comprise.com. Feel free to reach out to us. And one of the great things that Comprise can provide is, like Krishna said, since they're a completely software-based solution, they can very easily and with very low impact get into a customer's site, install it, and do a quick scan to give them an idea of how much money they can save with the solution.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you guys very much, and thank you for everyone that joined in today. We will be in touch with the recording shortly.